Welcome to Judaism Demystified, a podcast for the perplexed. Join us as we explore some of the most fascinating Jewish and Torah-related topics with our esteemed guests. By tackling some of the biggest questions you likely won't find addressed elsewhere, we aim to shed light on important issues and inspire a return to the fundamentals. Enjoy the show. Thank you, Rabbi Kanarfogel, for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. Before we begin this topic of getting to know Rashi, this is a series that we've been doing called Getting to Know the Rishonim. We'd like you first to tell the audience a little bit about yourself so we can understand your background and so forth.
Okay. My formal title is the Jewry University Professor of Jewish History, Literature, and Law. It's not as great as it sounds at Yeshiva University, especially at the Bernard Revel Graduate School where I teach and I have doctoral students and all of that. And I've been at Yeshiva my entire life, from high school on, my BA, my MA, my PhD, Smicha, Kollel, all the formal degrees are from Yeshiva, and I've been privileged to teach there basically, I was thinking about it, it's about 40-something years from full-time teaching, and I'm only 32, so it's pretty good. So I'm a Yeshiva fellow. Don't blame them on me. You can blame me on them. That's what I'll say. And I work primarily in exactly where you have me, in Balei Tosfot. Obviously, Rashi is a major factor, but especially in Ashkenaz, although I write across to Sfarad and Provence as well, and I've put out a number of books, a number of articles. I don't mean to plug, it's not another podcast, so don't worry. The intrepid Menachem Butler has managed to put everything that I've ever written, apparently, at least in articles, on Academia EDU. So if somebody wants to see what I've written or they hear something I say tonight, he's got everything listed. He knows about things that I wrote that I forgot. So it's just quite remarkable. But again, it just makes it easier because we're dealing with, Kinohara, more than 100 articles. It's a bunch of stuff. So I've not been sitting around. Let's put it that way. But anyway, it's nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So we'll just get right into it. The topic is going to be Rashi, who is one of the most important figures in Jewish history. The medieval French rabbis netted many important biblical commentators, from Rashi to Rashbam to Bechor Shor to Rav Yosef Kara to the Hizkuni. There was an abundance of Torah commentaries which came out of French Jewry. What makes this corpus of commentaries unique in their time? And is there a common thread in the methodology of the French biblical commentators?
Okay, so even though Rashi is the first, sort of, as people think about it, and he's the most famous and certainly the most studied, he was technically not the very first. Just to sort of go behind your question, Rashi was a Frenchman. He was born and died in northern France, in Troyes or Troyes, in the Champagne region, 1040 to 1105. Again, as I'm sure people know, Rashi did spend a period of time. It's probably shorter than we think, but he spent a period of time in Mainz and Worms, in the leading yeshivot in the Rhineland in the 11th century. France existed then as a center of Torah before Rashi, but it became much more of a center afterward. In Mainz and Worms, we have evidence, and here Professor Avram Grossman Zal really opened our eyes quite a bit. There was, quote unquote, biblical study going on in this yeshivot in Germany, and there was perhaps at least a precursor of what we might call Peshuto Shel Mikra, or Peshat, even a sort of fairly direct and simple. Simple is the wrong word. It doesn't mean simple as in silly. It means simple as an unencumbered approach to learning psukim. We don't have that much literature that survived. And again, and this, by the way, is true about Rashi's Perush al Hashas. Even though Rashi is the first, the greatest, the most important, he wasn't working in a complete and absolute vacuum. Again, how to get exactly from the earlier period to Rashi will take us too far afield. Rashi produces a Perush to virtually every tractate in the Talmud, not everyone, but virtually. And he produces a commentary to virtually all of Tanakh. Again, we know he dies Nebuch and Sefer Eov, exactly what that means, but that's where his Perush ends. And there are pieces, po v'sham, that maybe have been completed by others, but Rashi manages to produce all of this in his lifetime. As I love to tell my students, that's because Rashi could write with both feet and both hands at the same time. It's really a remarkable corpus. It's just, doesn't need my haskam. It's just a remarkable amount of work. Now, I'll come back to Rashi, but let me take your question as a whole. Once Rashi begins, that then sets off a cavalcade of Perushim al HaTorah in northern France, and there are things in Germany that relate to Rashi as well. So that as you sort of tick them off, your chronology wasn't perfect, but that's okay. Right? Rashi's own students, whether it's Yosef Kara, who, by the way, also learned a little bit in Germany, whether it's his grandson Rashbam, who Rashi talked to, and there's a place where in a manuscript, maybe even a printed text, where Rashi was very proud of Rashbam's perush to the Shira, Yemincha Hashem Nedari Bakoach, the Kayasm, Yemincha Hashem, and he calls that Reb Shmuel's perush, Man Shmuel, right? Rashi knew that Rashbam was not just a great Talmud Chacham and Shas person. He knew that Rashbam was doing these things, and of course, as Rashbam says famously in his introduction to the Parshas Vayeshev, that introductory piece, he discussed many things with Rashi, and Rashi agreed that if he had the time or the ability, he would write many more Perushim, according to the Pshatot. That's the correct, even though it's a masculine word, it's Pshatot Hamid Chadshim B'chol Yom, according to this new approach to Pshat, which Rashi kind of started. Now, clearly Rashbam's Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra is not the same as Rashi's Peshuto Shel Mikra, not identical. We'll talk about that when I go back to talk about Rashi, but that sets things off. Rashi had students in Mikra. Interestingly, he was very generous. He apparently let them add a little bit to his Perushim al Mikra. In other words, there are comments where the student says the Rebbe said X, Y, and Z, and I added, and either Rashi agreed or he certainly didn't object. Rashi himself apparently corrected, added to his own Perushim al HaMikra. Here is a person whose name I'll probably mention again in light of our discussion. Professor Penkower, recently retired from Ben Gurion University, Jordan. Yitzchak Penkower has a series of articles on revisions of Rashi, not major revisions beginning to end, but pieces, additions, addenda by his students, by Rashi himself.
I've heard about this.
Yeah,
I've heard about this. Yeah,
it's fantastic stuff. So this becomes a mif'al. This becomes an operation. As you then move further, but Rashi, there are hundreds of Rashi manuscripts, certainly al HaTorah, hundreds. Some of them are as the centuries go along. That's because it was exceptionally popular, right? Rashi al HaTorah, we have hundreds of manuscripts. Again, even in the first century or two, there are tens. Rashbam al HaTorah, we have what I like to call 1 1/4, meaning one in some pieces. Why? Rashi was that much more popular even than Rashbam. So Rashi, in the hearts and minds, and we can talk about the canonization of Rashi even on a halachic level by Balei HaTosfot and others, Rashi becomes the Perush very quickly. But just so in terms of Shas, Rashi's Pshat method in the Gemara, and it really is a Pshat, it's getting you through the Gemara. No razzle dazzle. It's getting you through the Gemara. The Wissenschaft scholars in the 19th century coined a term which I think is very apt: Maslul Talmud, a pathway through the Gemara. Once Rashi developed his Talmudic commentary, his descendants, his grandsons, his great-grandson, his students of other students could then, blast off to what we call Tosfot, which features a dialectical method that Rashi himself did not really employ, not at all, that, broadens and does other things. So in that case, Rashi is the enzyme. It's that's more than an enzyme. Without Rashi, there's nothing to do. Tosfot are commenting as much on Rashi's commentary on the Gemara as they are on the Gemara itself. Yeah. You can argue how many percent. Al HaTorah, it's a little different. Rashi does spawn an awful lot of productivity, but there's plenty of parshanut on Rashi. Later figures in France explaining what Rashi meant. They're asking questions on Rashi. It's though Rashi remains in first place by a mile. However, having said that, there is quite a bit of literature, as you indicated, not just from his immediate students, but going throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, which is attempting to do something like what Rashi did. And I'll just say, and this has been understudied. I deal with it in several chapters in one of my books on the actual history of Ashkenazic Jewry. It has been understudied. And even Poznansky, who did the great Mavo, the great introduction in 1913 in Warsaw to Chachmei Tzfon Tzarfat Befarshei HaMikra, who has all the names, he has all the details, people can read that. It's still a great work, 100, well, however many years later, it's 100 and whatever years later, fantastic. The people have not sufficiently recognized that subsequent work, but I think it's for a simple reason. Rashi was so good, nobody needed it. In other words, and this work in some ways imitates Rashi. It expands Rashi. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes so people can understand what these Balei HaTosfot are doing. And I'm not talking here about from the mid 13th century into the 14th, what we call the name Balei HaTosfot al HaTorah, Tosafos Torah commentaries, which are really compilations. Those are compilatory. It's not one person. It's a mixture. It's a real kind of thing.
Are you referring to the Datskenim?
That genre, right?
Okay.
Again, Datskenim, Hadar Zakenim, my personal favorite in terms of title, the Moshav Zakenim, which in Israel they call it Beit Avot now. They gave up Moshav Zakenim, but that's what it's called. Again, the name, the Zakenim, the Chachamim, Dat, Hadar, Moshav, right? That's got a lot of Midrash in it, but it also quotes Rashi, Rashbam, Bechor Shor, who is a critical, Rav Yosef Bechor Shor, who's a Talmudic student of Rabbi Dr, who's a critical figure in all of this. Rav Yosef Bechor Shor tried to imitate Rashi to a much greater extent than Rashbam. Right? Rashi does what he does. Rashbam goes Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra, drilling down further on the Peshat, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Bechor Shor is closer to Rashi. That we have published, so that people use. They don't use it enough. They don't know it well enough. But if you then go into the manuscripts, you will find, and I did this in this book, 4 or 5 or 6 other French and a little bit German too, which is a surprise, Balei HaTosfot, and German rabbinic figures who are doing things not unlike Rashi, not unlike Bechor Shor. And there are some real chidushim there. I'll lay a couple examples on you in a minute. But again, Rashi somehow scooped them all. So, you'll say, well, if Rashi, if we don't need anybody besides Rashi, why are we looking at these things? So the answer is we should look at these things because A, they'll help us appreciate more about Rashi, but B, there's a whole literature. It's what we call Sifrut Anifa. It's not, it's not 2 pages, plenty of stuff. And then that gets joined by these Balei HaTosfot al HaTorah, which quote all of the above, including these names that nobody really knows from the earlier period, the Balei HaTosfot. It mixes Pshat, Drash. I like to call the Kvatzei Balei HaTosfot al HaTorah. The example I like to give, you walk into any shul in Eretz Israel, and you'll know Dapim. You want Kabbalah, you can study Kabbalah on the Parsha. You want Gematria, Gematria. You want Pshat, Pshat. You want the Rav Zatzal, you want Rav Yosef, and some of them do everything. That's what these Balei HaTosfot al Torah are to an extent, and I think, frankly, they were doing what they did to bring in more lay people into the process. Not that Rashi is not for lay people, he is. But anyway, so if we break it down, if you let me, let's do it like this. What does Rashi stand for, right? He's our focus. What does Rashi stand for? So on the one hand, unlike the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah, who writes an extensive introduction to what he's doing. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what others have done, right? It's a real introduction. The Ramban al HaTorah, right, writing well after Rashi in Spain, talks about, I use Rashi, I use Ibn Ezra, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what they did. Not that long, but a real introduction, right? Never mind the Netziv, in the 19th century, those kind of introductions. Rashi does not write a formal introduction. However, along the way, at least not to his Peshuto Torah, Shir HaShirim he does. That's a very special case. As you know, and you were preparing for this, you fellows are well prepared. Breishis Gimel Ches, Rashi says, Ani lo bati ela, and it's in the middle of Breishis where this is a very apt declaration. Ani lo bati ela lepshuto shel mikra, I've come to tell you about Peshuto Shel Mikra and Aggadah HaMiyashevet Divrei Mikra, and Aggadah Chazal that solve pshat problems. That's how I read it. Some people read it differently, but no. So Rashi is noticing, which his grandson Rashbam noticed even more strongly, or said it more strongly, that for all that we have from Chazal on rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, meaning in the halachic sections, all the halachic stuff, but even in the narrative sections, all the Aggadah, all the Midrashim, all the Midrashay Halacha, Midrashay Aggadah, we need to put some focus on this thing called Peshuto Shel Mikra. And he says a third thing there, right? Peshuto Shel Mikra, Aggadah HaMiyashevet Divrei Mikra, and the third phrase, Davar Davur al Ofanav, which simply translated the three most important words in Rashi's biblical commentary, or at least Al HaTorah. And again, the question to what extent other works of Nach are the same or not, a different discussion. Davur Davur al Ofanav, three most important words: context, context, context. Meaning, I'd like to give you a straightforward reading through the Torah using either this Peshuto Shel Mikra, this simple, direct reading. I'll give you a better definition in a second, right? I will use Aggadah to solve the same questions that I raise on a pshat level. And it's interesting, he says pshat first. Somebody assumes, oh, that's his main goal. And Aggadah Miyashevet Divrei, that's second, so that must be a second goal in the context of context. Again, I read it a little more gently. Rashi knows that Peshuto Shel Mikra is the biggest chidush at this time. There's nothing like this. He knows that. And again, he does pshat in Gemara too. He's interested in these direct, not simple, but straightforward readings. He doesn't mean for Aggadah HaMiyashevet Divrei Mikra to be a distant second. That's my aim, A and B. So part of the thing that people notice, Rashi quotes a lot of Aggadah. So first of all, he quotes Aggadah that doesn't solve any pshat problems. But the truth is, Rashi probably cites more Chazal's al Shem Peshuto Shel Mikra than his own. I mean, there's plenty of his own too, and he'll cite, of course, multiple interpretations, right? I say Lefi Pshat, the pasuk means this. Chazal said this, but it solves my question, so I do it. And that's where Rashbam said, not that he never quotes Chazal, he does, but that's where Rashbam said, Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra. Let's leave the Aggadah not out, but let's put it in a real secondary position. Okay.
So is that what he means? Is that what he meant by the fact that later on in his life he would have done things differently? Is that,
in other words, he would have, I don't think he means he would have chucked the first part,
right,
and once he got through B'derech HaPshat of some sort, he understands there are more things you can do, right? Again, he gave this balance, and he gave this balance undoubtedly, Rashi being this unbelievably great, unique figure was a big on-off. So he knew he was pushing the envelope, but he didn't want to push it too far. In other words, Chazal, I don't want to give you thoughts of Rashi, and Chazal I'll wave at. So he gives you a mixture. What he's saying to his, first of all, at age whatever, Rashbam was about 20 when Rashi died, so we're not talking about, if he's talking to Rashbam, and even Rashbam couldn't talk when he was 1. I mean, I would say goo, but maybe he could say lumdus, but I don't know. So we're talking about, a man of, he was 60, talking about a man over 50 towards the end of his career. I don't know if he really meant he'd redo it all, but I think he did mean that one could suggest, again, Mem tet panim leTorah, not shivim panim, just layers, but there are multiple truths which Rashbam held very strongly. All Ashkenazim held that, right? Rashbam and Bava Basra is learning psukim, mi Torah dekra. Chazal saw an extra letter, an extra word. That's how they learned the pasuk. He's sitting al HaTorah and in Tanakh, even in Rashi, everywhere going, no Torah dekra, omek Peshuto Shel Mikra. I once asked a very great, I won't mention the name, but a very great scholar of Rashbam in Eretz Yisrael, no longer alive, which layer, which level they think Rashbam liked better. And the person was a Bible scholar. They said, oh, Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra. I said, no, he liked both equally. In other words, they're dealing with these multivalences. So Rashi is dealing with it one way, Rashbam is dealing with it a different way. And it's a holistic corpus, right? Again, something we won't get into tonight, probably, although it's something for people to think about. Do you ever notice how Rashi learns a pasuk in his Perush on Chumash and how he learns a pasuk in his Perush on Gemara? Right, the first pasuk in the Rosh Hashanah laning, Hashem pakad Sarah kasher amor, where Rashi says because Avram davened for Elimelech, Sarah became pregnant first. Good, okay. So Gemara and Bava Kama. He actually says more about how you learn the pasuk this way because it needs some manipulation in the Gemara than he does on Chumash. Now, maybe because on Chumash the person's looking at the pasuk, and the Gemara the person isn't. But that's also an interesting comparison. It shouldn't keep people awake at night, and they shouldn't have to worry if they finished it or not. But that's also an interesting. You have to assume they're playing mental chess here with 16 level boards. They're working. And it's all somehow coming together, even though when Rashi's writing his Perush on Chumash, he's not writing his Perush. Well, he is writing his Perush on Gemara because he's writing everything simultaneously, but he's not confused. He never, he doesn't miss a beat. He knows what he's doing here. He knows what he's doing there. So that's what Rashi says he wants to do. Again, the Rashbam, by the way, I'll give you a definition for Peshat that my first Tanakh teacher in Yeshiva College, when I was an early admissions freshman at the tender age of 16, told me. His name is Professor Moshe Sokolow. Maybe teaches in the Azrieli School of Jewish Education.
He's excellent. He wrote a book older than me.
What? That's that?
He wrote a book on Peshat.
Nachon, he just put out a great, terrific book. And unlike me, this is something you'll understand very clearly. Anyway, I'm trying to be clear. He said, Peshat means you only read out of the pasuk, right? You schlep out whatever's in the pasuk. That means the words of the pasuk itself. You can cheat and see what else in Tanakh uses that word. That's internal. You're taking it out of the of the verse. Drash means quintessentially you're reading something in.
Yeah.
So whether you're reading in a halacha of Chazal or a drasha of Chazal or a fantastic Aggadah or a fantastic Midrash, you're reading in. Rashi knows he's reading out, and he has rules. Again, Rashbam has a little tighter rules, if I can say that. I don't want to say that too strongly. A little different rules, but that's where Rashi starts. Again, if you move now to Bechor Shor, Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, who in his other life is called Rabbi Yosef ben Yitzchak of Orleans. He's a Talmud in Gemara of Rabbeinu Tam. I don't know if he learned with Rashbam on Mikra, but he quotes Rashi and Rashbam sort of quite evenly. A little more Rashi, but he quotes both. Bechor Shor is trying to go back to Rashi. More Chazal, but fantastic Pshatim. Because Rashbam for him is a little bit radical. A little bit. And that then moves forward into Bechor Shor. Rashi dies in 1105. Rashbam dies 1158, 60, different misparim, doesn't matter. Bechor Shor dies at the end of the 12th century, although his parish might have been written earlier. And you then get a series of Balei HaTosfos who do the same kind of thing. Students of Rabbeinu Tam, Yom Tov of Joani, Yaakov of Orleans, and then moving forward. Reb Moshe Mikutzi wrote a Perush al HaTorah. He dies around 1250. That has Pshatei Reb Moshe Mikutzi. I'll give you examples of each, and I'll try to put it into some context. You wanted to ask something? I'm sorry. Let me try to give you a little bit of context. So on the pasuk, Yaakov comes, Esav comes back from his hunting. He comes from the Sadeh. V'hu ayef. He's exhausted. So Rashi doesn't quote all the Midrashim, what he was doing Esav that day wrong that made him tired. Rashi says, Birit Sicha. He was busy. He was a tired guy, Esav, because he's billing. I guess this is a rule. Hitmen get tired. I don't know. He was busy bumping people off. And of course, it's an allusion to the Chazal that Esav did every Aveira at that point. He was doing them all, which really made him tired. Rashi doesn't go that far, but he says that. That's Aggadah HaMiyashevet Ephraim Mikra. Why is Esav a tired guy? So either he's working 6 jobs or he's doing extracurricular activities that are very, that sap his energy, right? On that pasuk, Yosef Bechor Shor says, second. Medieval hunting, he doesn't give you a course, but in the Middle Ages, and this is largely true, animals are all over the place. I always tell students, you think you want to live in the time of the Rishonim, you have to watch out that, never mind, highwaymen shouldn't kill you, God forbid, robbers. Animals are running wild everywhere. You're in the Rashi, you look at Bechor Shor, he says, you're in the forest, and you go for 3 or 4 days, and Valgetzach, you go into the woods, and you chase all the wilde chayes. This way, that way, like the Bugs Bunny cartoon. This way, that way, up, down, in, here. You come back, you're oisgematet and oisgemitchet. You're talk exhausted. Now, what does that do? That's a little Rashbamian. It's a little bit derech eretz. We read, but it's in some ways even finer than Rashbam. You read in, you read out, right? The story was he's hunting, right? So you read out the source of his exhaustion. You don't have to input or impute, exhausted from sins as Rashi did, right? And he says that he got so, listen to this, he was so oisgematet, he was so exhausted, Yiddish words, right? Better words in Yiddish, right? They literally couldn't pick up their hands. They were so exhausted. They were out, like we say on Yom Kippur, where we're at, God forbid, not death's door, but where we're so starved, where we can't do anything else but say HaKadosh Baruch. Esav couldn't do anything else. That's why he told him, feed me the soup in my mouth. It wasn't just that he was a zhlub. He couldn't pick his hands up. He was like, feed me the soup. Terrific. So it accounts for all the details. Completely lo lefi hamidrash, completely.
Okay,
so it's that kind of thing that others do. She has some things like that. Just to conclude this piece, so
right? It's almost like he's in conversation with Rashi. He's saying, Rashi, you decided to go and bring from outside. I don't feel that was really necessary. I think that we can read it in. Quite
I like your absolutely right. You could come to my classes. You hopped it. You're good. Very, very good. Very well hopped. With Bechor Shor, it's not so much we're going to go a whole different way. It's we're going to have 2 drachim, but I'm going to put some more of these things in that you didn't have. Listen, can you imagine competing with Rashi's Parish? You have to say Hineni Animimas 10 times a day, right? Bechor Shor did. Again, that's been published. People know a little Bechor Shor, so it's not completely known. By the way, just for the listeners, go back to the pasuk of the Sulam, right? Yaakov and his ladder. So Rashi says this is a classic Aggadah Me'ashevet Ephraim Mikra, although Rashi frames it to solve the purpose, right? Rashi asks, he knows the question. Who goes? He sees in the dream, Olim Vior Dimbo. So he could say it's a dream. No, Olim Vior Dimbo, right? What's with the going up and the going down, right? Malachim are going up and down. Malachim don't use, what's going on here? So Rashi says the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael, it's a change in shifts, right? The Eretz Yisrael Malachim are leaving him, are bidding him adieu. They protected him to the Gvul and Yana Diyoma, and now the Malachi Chutz La'aretz are going to take him the rest of the way, right? So they're going up and they're coming down. That's Aggadah HaMe'ashevet Divrei Mikra. Good. Rashbam, of course, famously says, Derech Eretz. It's a ladder. Anybody ever climb down a ladder before climbing up it? Not unless you're upside down. Now, the problem is Rashbam's Perush, I don't want to say it's the wrong way. I don't mean sterile that it's Chasur Mashma'ut, but it's a little bit, it's a little bit jarring. So Bechor Shor tends to smooth over, right? Bechor Shor talks about Esav's change of clothing, right? Why is Rivka holding his suits, and that? Good question, He says, because again, it's continuation. When you go to hunt, you wear the hunting clothes. While you're running like a madman for 3 and 4 days without eating properly and all that, after the chayas, you develop quite a smell. Therefore, you come home, you put your smelly clothes in the hamper, wherever you put them, and you go to the nice house, and you take a shower, whatever. You put on the cologne, and now you put on your people clothes that don't smell. All you got to know about is medieval hunting, and Yosef, who was writing Yosef Bechor in the 12th century, makes fantastic sense. I'll give you another one, right? Bechor Shor asks the question. It's a very good question. When Moshe sees the sneh, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. One second. Take your shoes off your feet. That's what it says. Where else was he wearing his shoes? On his ears? Take off your shoes. Shal na'alecha. Zokt Bechor Shor. No. Na'al doesn't automatically or only mean shoes. Na'al means leatherware. Na'alayim and leatherware. You could wear leather on your feet. You could wear leather on your hands, gloves. And he says, just like people today, all the, he doesn't say the knights, but all the fancy people, the gauntlet, throw down the gauntlet. They wear gloves. They ride horses. They wear gloves. So you had to tell him, Shal na'alecha. Fascinating. Now, by the way, Rashi does this in these parshias, right? The Kohen Gadol Rashi says his begodim looked like, what's the phrase? The matronisa, the matrons, they, puffy, right? It doesn't look like a dress, but it looks like the mashal that Rashi gives. It looks like what women wear today, a certain style of clothing, right? So Rashi knows something about derech eretz. He's not immune to it, but that's not how he's doing Chumash. And by the way, the Bechor Shor says, and yet now I can understand better what happens at the end of Megillas Rus, right? What does the Pasuk say in Megillas Rus? Visholaf Ishna Alo, when he acquired the whole thing from the Ploni Almoni, they made a kinyan chalipin. They gave each other a shoe. All right, a shoe was a kli. I'm a little older than you. When I was a kid, there was Khrushchev. He came to the UN, and when he liked to express disagreement, he took off his shoe. He was not very manly, and he banged his shoe on the table. Apparently, that's what you do in Slavic, or whatever. They did it to Bush too, right? They exchanged shoes. It's a kli, a pen, a shoe, a key. Bechor says, what shoe? They made a mamish a kinyan suitor. Not shalaf ish na'alo. He gave him his glove, and he gave him his glove. And he says that all Torah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understood you before I ask you to go back on certain issues and maybe get a little bit more into certain things that has already been kind of already said, but I want to get into it more. But from what I'm understanding, when you take Rashi, Rashbam, and Bechor Shor, and those are kind of three streamlines, right? Rashi felt uncomfortable going towards his own understandings, his own analytical understandings in regards to solving certain issues, and he deferred to Chazal when that issue came about. Rashbam only allowed, not only, I shouldn't say only, because like you said, he does bring Midrash, but let's just say mainly wanted to streamline within the text. And if there was a problem within the text, he's going to analyze the text and make the best he could and bring it out from whichever way he can within the text. Peshuto Shel Mikra. Bechor Shor is kind of a mediator, right? In the sense that, when if Bechor Shor doesn't feel like it's working, he'll bring in the Midrash. But if he feels that it can work, he won't go there, and he'll.
Well, I'm not sure that. I think he'll do, if he thinks it's valid, he'll bring it in. I just want to make one comment, one caveat on Rashbam. Again, Rashbam, by the way, like Rashi, although the beginning of his Perush on Bereshis has been missing, they found it in Kisvei and Eretz Torah. They pulled it out of Perushim al Balei Torah. Very interesting. A fellow in Eretz Torah did a very interesting job on that. As far as we know, he didn't write a major introduction at the beginning either. He wrote in Vayeshev. There's something at the beginning. He wrote in Vayeshev about Pshatot HaMitchadshim B'chol Yom.
The famous one,
yeah. And he wrote in Mishpatim, for example, right? Before he interprets Va'avado Le'olam, that according to the Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra, the Eved Ivri Shenirtza should work forever, right? The halacha goes out in Yovel. He says, that's what it means. Okay. But at that point, precisely because he's going to drop, you'll forgive me a word you can't say today, he'll drop those bombs, those exegetical bombs, no real bombs here, right? He has a Hakdama. And what does he say in the Hakdama? Chazal knew that the halacha v'haggadah, Aggadah, heim ha'ikar. The number one derech to understand the Torah with the Chazal major, with halacha, right? But Chazal also said, it's a Mishnah, ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Again, it's the multiple, that's why I tell you, the multiple
layers.
Not a medieval truth theory in the medieval philosophical sense. Call that layer 4. I'll make up a number. I'm going to specialize in number 4. They did 1 and 2 or whatever it is. I'm doing 4. So he protects himself. By the way, and that explains. I hope nobody will get too excited.
It reminds me of the Ibn Ezra. I feel like the Ibn Ezra does the same exact thing. Yes.
Okay. I like you. You're reading my mind. We'll have to sign you up later. I'm always looking for doctors. Ibn Ezra got in trouble. Right? He got in trouble because of his pshatim that were against Chazal, right? He got in trouble. Oh, the Marshal gave him a Mishaberach in the introduction to his. By the way, the Balei HaTosah HaTorah like Ibn Ezra much better. They like him fine. You know why? Because when they're learning Chumash, they don't mind the Ibn Ezra. When they're learning Halacha, there's a Tosas in one place, so they say, Ibn Ezra's wrong, he'll Halacha, forget the Ibn Ezra. If we're learning Halacha, we'll leave the Ibn Ezra home. If we're learning Chumash, we can live with him. I'll give you an example, a very cool example in a second. The reason Ibn Ezra got in trouble and Rashbam didn't, and I don't mean it's contrived, Ibn Ezra believed, I think as the Rambam did too, that there's only one real pshat for a pasuk. You can't have this multivalence. I mean, he gives different possibilities, right? And so he could not tell a lie. He must tell you the Peshuto Shel Mikra and let the chips fall they may. Rashbam has not a disclaimer in a modern phony sense. Past performance is no indication. Yeah. You don't want to get sued. But the moment Rashbam says, I'm doing Omek Peshuto Shel Mikra like Chazal, but really I also have not just Derech Eretz, I also do in my parish in Bava Basra and any place else where I'm cited al Talmud. I do like them, number one. So I know the layers, and I'm locating myself. So don't have tightness to me. And indeed, most did not. Now, again, what I said before, 1 1/4 manuscripts. By the way, my Bechor Shor, who I love, you know how many manuscripts we have of him?
Many.
1.5. But the difference is, the Balei HaTosah HaTorah quote both of them. But they quote Bechor Shor even more than Rashbam. Because, again, he speaks to both. They're looking for this that's what Rashi introduced. It's multivalenced, right? Multivalenced on Mikra. And that becomes the French model generally. Now, when you were saying, by the way, Kara, the student of Rashi, is closer to Rashbam, right? I said there's a group, right? Again, my Balei HaTosah, and I'll give you an example in a second, are closer to Bechor Shor. And then you come to a very interesting sort of slight exception, to his time, the Hizkuni.
Yeah.
Hizkuni, we know, I mean, Poznansky had it pretty good. He lives late in the 13th century, probably writing around 1275. So he's 100 years after Rashbam, he's later. Poznansky thought Hizkuni was from Provence, perhaps, because he likes Peshat a lot, a little more radical in Provence, because his name is Chizkiah ben Manoach, and he couldn't find any Manoachs in Ashkenaz. So many years ago, after I found the 20th Manoach in Ashkenaz, I said, we better throw that out and try again. Hizkuni is from northern France, but he's got Gisha. He knows Provençal stuff. Hizkuni has a poetic introduction to his Perush, opaque. You can't tell except for Rashi, who he quotes sometimes by name, who the other 9, he says, I'm really a collection. Not that there's nothing original there, but I'm really bringing stuff from other people. 19 other people. So Poznansky gave it a shot. Sarah Yefet, Aleh Shalom, did a nice job in a Sefer Yovel for Mordechai Breuer, the Tanachist, a very nice article. I think by now, she put in a few more. I think by now we can get to around 15. And again, the missing people were these French Balei HaTosah who do Bechor Shoring and things. He loves Rashi. He loves Rashbam. He loves Bechor Shor. He loves some of my other Balei HaTosah who do Bechor Shor-like things. He loves Ibn Ezra. So he does, again. and you can get the number pretty high. Exactly what he's doing, he's doing, again, Peshuto Shel Mikra. He's an interesting character. We have not a word from him in halacha. He didn't write, except, interestingly, every once in a while he'll make a comment. One of my recent books was on apostasy in medieval Europe. He has a comment in Parshas with the Levium, the purification of the Levium, Baloscha, to take over the job of the Bechorim. He gets into a whole thing there with the shaving the entire body. He says, oh yeah, because the Levium, it's to be mechapra chet egel, that involved, avodah zara, zivchei mesim, there's death there, spiritual death. So they had to shave. They're like Metzora. He has a whole interesting thing with the Peshat, very fascinating. He says, and that's how they treat returning apostates in our day in Europe. Things that Balei Halacha talk about, he's got it sitting there. So he clearly was a Lamdan. He wasn't, not the people who do Tanakh are not Lamdanim, but he clearly was a Lamdan too. But he's really a very interesting kind of he would be in a category by himself, except he's busy quoting all these earlier authorities. But again, he's at the same time as the Das Sekanim. So they're doing Midrash, a lot of Midrash, but they're also quoting all these French Tosafists, including the Pashtanim. He's busy sticking to, he's kind of I want to be a Rashbam, Bechor Shor, Rashi, Kara. He quotes Kara. I want to be a successor of that. So he's a little bit of an exception there, but interesting.
Okay, so I wanna get back into the idea of Midrash with Rashi.
Okay.
We've talked about it, you've touched upon it, and the multi-layering and all that.
Right.
Can we get into more detail, or what would be your opinion? Because I do feel that, in a sense, this question is almost impossible to answer.
Yep.
But it's something that I really want to get into as much as possible.
Right.
How did he understand Midrashim?
Right.
Did he look at them as that Chazal was I don't even know how to phrase it correctly, but if you had to encapsulate, how did he understand? He's reading a Midrash. Rashi's reading a Midrash right now.
Right.
What is he seeing there? How does it process to him?
So it's not an easy question to answer.
I know, I said it's an impossible question.
Not easy.
I started
First
off
of all, a fundamental assumption of Rashi, and I probably think many Rishonim, the wildest Midrash on a pasuk sees something in that pasuk that allows them to hang that Midrash on that pasuk. In other words, there's never a complete disconnect. If the Midrash is associated with a particular pasuk, there's got to be something in there that's not a horrible, a tremendous pshat question. There's got to be something in there that needs work, right? Chazal didn't just haul off and, again, take the Asaph thing. He's ayef because he's doing Ritzicha, Avodah Zarah, he's doing, it takes off of somewhere, right? The problem is sort of the other way, which, again, I know you're aware of. Depends who you ask exactly, and scholars are also deeply divided on this question. Rashi quotes midrashim that are not necessarily a midrash that is miyashev divrei hamikra.
Yeah,
right. He'll go extra.
Yeah,
right?
You don't need. Yeah, it's kind of like what we were saying before.
But again, first of all, those midrashim. I'll give you a great example in a half a second. Those midrashim are, again, not coming from outer space. There's something in the pasuk which set them off. But Rashi is quoting them, and here it's a great machloket hachokrim. Some chokrim think that you really have to parse those midrashim to understand, what was Rashi seeing as miyashev divrei mikra in them, and you really have to go to the nth degree. And others say Rashi liked Midrash. But why did Rashi like Midrash? Rashi had plenty of things to learn. What he liked, he may also have liked the club soda, but we don't know, right? Rashi liked Midrash. He liked Midrash because of what he could do with it and what it could teach his readers. So I like, it's old, it's tried, it's true, but it still works. What many Chokrim think, that there is a certain amount of quote-unquote pedagogic mikra. Midrash in Rashi. In other words, when Rashi goes off the program, if you will, right? First of all, again, he will not just drop a midrash here that has no connection to the pasuk, where there's
Right.
nothing in the pasuk which needs some tikkun, some hesber, not tikkun, but a hesber. But he'll go far. One of my favorite examples coming up a couple of weeks now. We have, Vayakal and Pekudi are separate, but we're in the Mishkan. In Vayikra, the Asham Talui, right? The Asham that's brought where you're not sure, right? The pasuk says, Lo yada v'ashem v'nasa avono. He didn't know he was guilty, so nasa avono means he's stuck with it. He's got to have like the cat in the hat. He can't get the stain out. He's got to do something. So Rashi quotes Rabbi Yossi Hagli quotes a whole chazal. Hariakos of onash es mishlo yada. Oh, you see the pasuk punishes. In other words, without the carbon, you're in big trouble here, right? Somebody who didn't know that they did an avero, he wasn't sure. Al achas kama v'chama shiyanish es mishi yada. Right? This is a musar. If you do avero, right? Okay. But then Rashi goes, he quotes Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yossi Glili. He quotes the rest of the Midrash. Lo nitztavel mitzvot lo tasev avar lehem, right? Again, I'm sorry. Im nafshecha leida matan scharan shel tzadikim. You want to know why tzadikim are tzadikim? Because they didn't do any avera. They watched every avera very carefully. And then Rabbi Akiva says, "Al pishnayim edim o shlosha edim," right? And he gets into a whole thing about leave edim that you did mitzvos. It's a whole story about doing mitzvos, not doing averos, not unknown averos, not known averos. It's a whole drasha. Afterwards you'll say Rabbi Chananya and the Kasha Omer. It's a long piece. Because this is about being a good Jewish person. So, I don't want to oversimplify it. So, again, if Rabbi Yossi HaGlili hadn't said something that related directly to Pasuk, I don't know that Rashi would have brought this in. He could have given it to Shul as a drasha, But once he does that, zoom. And again, it's not a wild midrash, but it's there. Again, call it pedagogic, call it for the readers. In other words, Rashi wanted to give his readers more than just, again, by the way, I think that's part of his modesty. You don't like my Peshuto Shel Mikra over here? You don't like my Aggadah? Oh, I'll give you a nice drush so that you'll like. It's chazal. It's good for you. So I don't mean to make him sound so paternalistic, but he really wanted to help. Look, Rashi's Perush on Shas was written for one reason only, to help somebody get through Shas, if not on their own, more easily.
Yeah.
Rashi is Mr. Public Service. He didn't paskin the sugyas. He didn't have to show you how much he knew in halacha. He didn't ask so many kashas that weren't relevant.
He was clarifying. He was strictly clarifying.
Yeah. Oto adavar. He learns Chumash. He doesn't have to show you. In other words, he's going to try his new method, and he does it very well, and he does it very strongly and very seriously over an entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah. But he's going to give you things that are just good for you, the reader, to know. Again, that are not. It doesn't take much. He doesn't have to do heavy lifting to get to those midrashim.
I'll tell you why I think that your stance has legs. First of all, the fact that you see that his very own students, like Mari Kara, has such a disciplined Peshat approach, and he's a student of Rashi, it already shows Rashi was not just, meaning he wasn't throwing around, meaning his students have a disciplined rigor towards the way they're approaching the text, right? Okay.
Right.
And then you see also with the Rashbam and their conversations, Rashi's almost admitting to him, right? Like that layer over there that you're hyper focused on. I wish I could have done more on that hyper focused layer, but I didn't. Right. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that what you're saying has legs, just from the kind of from the information that we have of his students, of his grandson, of certain correspondences, from the way things developed out of him, like the French Pashtanim were till today, it's extremely important what they did for us.
Right.
We still use them. I think that it makes sense to say that Rashi with Midrash had maybe more than one. that he wasn't just bringing in the Midrash because that was just pshatim good night. Like it wasn't exactly like that.
Right.
That there was multifaceted reasons, and he was kind of being creatively bringing things into the psukim to have different outcomes and like you say, pedagogical reasons.
By
That's
the way,
just my opinion, though.
Since you're being supportive, I'll be supportive of you as follows. One of Rashi's other contributions to Pshat is his grammar, right? Rashi is a great grammarian. And it's interesting because Rashi quotes Menachem and Dunash. Those are his correspondents in grammar who are 10th century Spanish, North African. Rashi did great diktuk, except he didn't know one thing yet. That every kid who gets, the diktuk charts, PL, Pua, Rashi did not yet know that a trilateral root, Pea, Poel, that's sine qua non, right? That when you treat verbs, you treat them with their 3 core letters. All right, some there are 4-letter verbs, lefarnes, whatever, right? So, because Menachem and Dunash didn't know that yet. According to them, the root of the word nun taf nun, to give, was nun, because in Ovar, it's not nasanti, it's nasati. The people who know grammar will tell you that's what the degation about. If people understand that, fine. If not, we'll have to learn more diktuk. And in future, it's not entain, it's etain. So they didn't yet know. They did all their. So you have entries in Menachem and Dunash where 1 or 2 letters will be the sources of 22 verbs because those 2 letters go along. Rashi, therefore, by the way, Rashbam didn't know it either. The 2 of them, I like to call them, and I mean this only complimentarily, really, the greatest seat of the pants Hebrew grammarians you could ever find. Without any kalim, without what we consider basic, right? And they put tremendous effort into the diktuk, again, for itself, and I like your point there. Rashi did pshat for that. He was a very pure scholar. He learned diktuk for itself, but he also learned it for the parish. Now, moving a step forward, Rashbam, it turns out also, Rashi never wrote a sefer diktuk. Again, he was busy. He was a little busy. Rashbam, we have a sefer diktuk that somebody published a number of years. It's interesting to see Rashbam ala Torah. How does it compare to a sefer diktuk? Does it agree on everything? Is that right? Rabbeinu Tam wrote Hachraot. And by the way, again, Dunash HaMenachem. That's all they had, Hebrew. The reason that Rashi and Rashbam didn't know trilateral roots is because that came out among students of Menachem and Dunash in the 11th century, beyond, in Arabic. They sprechen nicht die Arabisch. They didn't read Arabic. Rashi knew words in Arabic, but they didn't have access to Arabic. So Ibn Chayuj and others who developed the trilateral root as a, sine qua non, they had no idea. So Ibn Ezra knows it, others don't. They had no idea. Rashbam writes a sefer diktuk. Rabbeinu Tam, who doesn't write on Mikra, interestingly. Not much. I mean, he interprets psukim, not much. There's a very interesting chidah about that. Anyway, it goes to the Tos and Kedushin, but not exactly. It's more than that. Rabbeinu Tam wrote Hachraot. He wrote a grammar book resolving the machlokot between Dunash and Menachem. He also wrote we have a parish to Mishlei that probably is Rabbeinu Tam, which again, Mishlei was the basic work of Jewish thought for Chachmei Ashkenaz. That's, you want to know Jewish thought, right? Read Mishlei. I'm sorry, not Mishlei. Mishlei. Anyway, Mishlei, they were a little bit on Eov also. Those are these works. Okay. There's a brother who was named after Rashi. Apparently, was born. Rabbeinu Tam was 5 when Rashi died. He was the 3rd son. There was another son who died early, Yitzchak. There's a Shlomo ben Meir, Rashbam's and Rabbeinu Tam's younger brother. He was called Avi Hadaikanim, the head grammarian. So these guys all knew. By the way, there's a Rashi in Chulin, Daf Kuf Tezayin. There's a long Rashi on a Mishnah in Chulin. It goes 2/3 of a page. Rashi never writes 2/3 of a page, anything.
Never.
You look at the end, it says, from the parish of Rab Shlomo ben Meir. It's not a cardinal sin. It's not a capital crime to have a piece of one of his Heineklach fall into his parish. It's not exactly kilayim. It's not basa b'cholov, Anyway, they all, I said to sit at that dinner table, you had to have written a book in grammar. So again, that's the point, your point that you're making. Rashi was very serious about these disciplines, whatever form they took. The students did pick it up significantly.
Yeah,
that's about that.
Yeah, exactly.
No doubt about that. I just want to tell you again, just so you'll, not that you disbelieve me, but we'll let the listeners believe me too. I want to give you two pshatim of someone named Rabbi Yomtov of Jewry. Jewry is a little town near where Rashi and Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam lived, not the Swanee River. It's Jewry, Rabbi Yomtov of Jewry, who's quoted in Tosas. He's a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam. He's a Menachem of Jewry. There's a parish of his that I found, and I've written about this in this book, found only in certain enriched Paneach Raza manuscripts. Paneach Raza is one of those kvatzim, one of those late 13th century collections, also very good. And so we have like 80 comments from him. If I have 80 comments from him, that means there's a whole book out there that we just don't have. Two things. He learns the pasuk with Yosef. It says that when the brothers of Yosef came to Mitzrayim, when the famine happened, it says that Yosef was giving out the food, right? Yosef hu ha-shalit, hu ha-mashbir. He was the ruler of Egypt. He was second in command. He was also the mashbir, like the chain in Eretz Yisrael, right? He was the quartermaster. If he was the ruler, why do I have to know he's the quartermaster? He could do whatever he wants, right? He could run the whole show. And the pasuk before says that the sons of Yaakov had no choice. They came b'so chabaim. Everybody came down to Egypt to get food. They came with all the other people. What do I care if they came with all the other people? How did they come? They had their own plane? What goes on here? So this Rabbi Yontav Rajni says the dialogue behind the psukim, the thinking behind the psukim, which is exactly what Pashtanim do, some of them, not, again, you're not reading in, you're reading out, but you're reading out from what's behind it. It goes like this. When Yosef took over and he said he's going to sell grain to people, some people said, I'm expanding it, I'm colloquializing it, Jewish and non-Jewish businessmen said, oh, good, we're going to become middlemen. We'll go to Egypt, we'll buy the grain up from Yosef, we'll take it 100 miles out, and we'll sell it at 6 times the cost. We'll save people, trips. Yosef was too smart for that, because that would have ruined his whole plan. Then the brothers wouldn't have had to shop. And the brothers said, oh, we're going to be the first customers of those middlemen. We'll pay anything not to have to go to Egypt. We don't want to go run into Yosef. Yosef's a little smarter than they are. He's got the Ruach HaKodesh. And he says, Hu ha-shalit, hu ha-mashbir. 2 rules. Number 1, everybody who wants food has to show up in person. And number 2, they got to deal with me. However he did it. Means, right? That explains why the pasuk says Yosef hu ha-shalit hu ha-mashbir. It's not an extraneous word. Exactly. Yosef used his rulership capacity to make this rule. And it explains also these words, haba'ib besoch, they're coming with other people. What do I need it for? No. They had no choice. 1, 2, cute, right? Cute. Is that omek Peshuto Shel Mikra? It's not drash. It's, right? Next one will blow your socks off, I think, I hope. Why was the Eved Ivri, and this involves Rashi, so you'll like it better. Rashi doesn't learn that way. Why was the Eved Ivri, why was his ear drilled into the door? They all in the door with the ear. What's with the ear? So Rashi says the Chazal. By the way, that's an Aggadah me'ashevet divrei mikra. The ear that heard, Anochi Hashem, you're my servants and not other people's servants. Therefore, we put it in your ear. That's Aggadah me'ashevet divrei mikra.
Right.
A lovely Chazal. And by the way, it's also a nice Chazal. It's all good. It's pedagogic. It's salamailis. This Yom Tov Rani says, it's very simple. The ear was chosen for a very practical reason. What's the problem with an Eved who becomes a Nirtzah, right, after 6 years? He's stuck. He has to stay till the Yovel. It could be a long time. It could be short, right? He may get wanderlust. He wants to escape. So he jumps the fence and he goes somewhere. So if you did the sign of the Eved Nirtzah in his leg, why do you have a boo-boo on your leg? I cut it playing tennis, Guy has a thing on his ear. Wait a second. You don't get things on your ear randomly. This is an Eved Nirtzah. We better alert the people. Okay, good. They alert the people. And 2 guys show up who lost their Eved, whose Eved escaped. And one guy, the first guy says, that's my Eved. Oh, I recognize him. I know his face anywhere. And the other guy says, no, that's my Eved. How do you tell whose Eved it is? Cinderella, who fits the slipper? You take the guy's ear to the door where it was, right? The striations, the markings will in this guy's ear will match what's in the door.
Uh-huh.
It's
Wow.
kind of a biblical criminology thing here.
Right.
It's fantastic.
Very interesting.
The
And
same way.
these were all offshoots from Rashi, which is the whole point that we're trying to make here.
Offshoot from Rashi, I would say Rashi as modified as described to Bechor Shor. By the way, you know what Bechor Shor says about Eglah Rufa? Why were they doing this crazy ceremony? You see that they're crawling around with the long white beards and they're measuring and they're doing and they're coming. Then Rashi says, because we didn't do enough. The Rambam famously gives a tam. What's the Rambam's tam? Biblical criminology. Namely, you have an unsolved murder.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You need clues. If people from the nearby places will see the greatest Zakanim crawling around with the ruler and the thing, they'll say, well, last Tuesday night, I think I heard something. They'll rack their brains. You get clues. Bechor Shor, who didn't yet have that Rambam, goes a step further. He says, and by the way, the Ramban, who says it's to get the Kohanim to say Kaper La'amcha Yisrael, he doesn't disagree with the Ram. He just says if the Rambam was, he says it's an interesting idea. If he was right, though, it should not have been done in a Nachal Asher Lo Yizaraya, in some off place, some pristine field. It should have been done in the town square. The more the merrier. Bechor Shor, who didn't have Rambam in front of him, chronologically not really possible, certainly not Marvuchim in any case, says better than that. They would bring to this what would happen when you had an Eglah Rufa ceremony, and the weirder the better, break the neck, the things that are not Jewish. What Jewish people break cows and little baby cows, right? He says all the agunas would come. In medieval, today we have a problem that the agunas can't get a get. Whatever, there are problems, the Bezdin, the this. In those days, that wasn't the problem. Aguna meant, God forbid, the husband went on business. He went to travel somewhere, and he was eaten up by an animal. It was bopped over the head. And how can you find it? There's no FBI, there's no DNA, no nothing. This was a convention. All the Agunas would come, Nebuch, to see, is that their guy? Again, it's like the Rambam. So they discuss, we get all kinds of, the children would come to see how they Yorshim, right? That's Bechor Shor. You can't see Rashi saying that, but you could see Bechor. So you're right. I won't drive you crazy with these. I could give you one more. Here's a great one.
Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's your nickel. I'm overdoing the.
Not at all.
Love
the
it.
circuit. The circuit shouldn't start the frying.
This is my jam right now.
We're eating this up.
Okay, Baruch Hashem. No, when you prepare as well as you guys did with I have no problem. Why did Levi? Why did Leo? Yeah, that's the question. Who named him? But why was Levi named Levi? Hapam Yilavesh. Leah says, Hapam, she got trouble. Hapam Yilavesh Elai. My husband will stick with me. So Rashi quotes the Chazal again. A beautiful Aggadah Me'ashevet Ephraim Kanarfogel, but very Chazal. All the imahos, including the two shvachos, were nevios, and they prophesied that Yaakov would have 12 children, which means, do the math, if each one had 3, they would do in their share.
Right.
So Leah said, my husband will stick with me. Yatzati et dechovati. I did my job. I had my 3 quota. Levi was number 3. Again, that's why will Yaakov then stick with her? I'm part of the plan. I'm with the program. There's a Perush quoted in the name. It's quoted in one of those kvatzim. We don't have the original. I'll tell your listeners too. If you ever see a manuscript somewhere or a text that quotes Perushim from Rav Moshe Mikutzi, who authored the Smog, pshatim from him, right? Email me. You can get the contract. I'll fly wherever you are to go look to see what this thing is. Rav Moshe Mikutzi wrote Kanireh, as he's quoted in what's called the Riva. It has another name. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, somebody writing in 1330, the Minchas Yehuda, right? Riva ben Elazar quotes Rav Moshe Mikutzi, Pratei Rav Moshe like this. Ready? I caveat, not spoiler alert, but caveat. The Chidah in one place thinks that there were two Rav Moshe Mikutsis because in one place there's a Rav Moshe Mikutsi quoted by this Minchas Yehuda that contradicts something that the Smag said. But I think based on Kisvei Yad, the Chidah knew more Kisvei Yad than I do, but based on Kisvei Yad that I saw, I think we can solve that problem. So one day, if I am zocher to see the Chidah, I'll tell him this. He'll probably think I'm an idiot, but maybe he'll agree. Anyway, I think it's Rosh Mikutsi. I lie. It's on me. What does he say? I mean, some are Rosh Mikutsi, but I think it's the one right. He says like this. Leah says, lie. My husband's going to stick with me. Why? Because now we have 3 children. There are 2 different versions of this, but they're the same idea. If you have 2 kids, so either the wife can take one and her maidservant can take the other, right? Or the wife can hold 1 kid under each arm. That's 2. But now that I have 3 children, he got to stick with me.
He has to be involved.
To one of them, he got to give the bath. He got to do something. I mean, I'm not.
As a father of 3 children, I know exactly what he means.
Azay Zok the Ramosha Mikutsi, Pshatei Ramosha Mikutsi. And again, he's in that same schnit.
Yeah. It's such an important point. It's such an important point because Rashi gets a very bad rap, and there's reasons for that. And I want to segue into that too. But bad rap in terms of you're just quoting Midrash. But when you look at the students and you look at the streamline that came out of him, I mean, these were people that took great care with their commentaries on the Torah, as you're demonstrating. Right. And I don't think that the point can be stressed enough.
And Rashi has many more. Rashi throws many more speeds of pitches now that baseball season is coming, Baruch Hashem, to give us some way of doing all the crazy stuff. He threw a lot of different speeds and different Talmidim. In other words, you could pick up this speed, you could pick up that speed, and they were. It reminds me a little bit of Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal. Rav Soloveitchik knew everything. He did this, he did learning, he did this, and different students. Very few picked up all of it, because how could you? Some picked up more on this, some picked up more on that. People that we know, we don't have to get everybody involved, but that's, I don't want to say lahavda, but that's exactly the same idea. Something else, by the way, and I understand, I've had colleagues say to me, Rashi on Shas is much more serious than Rashi on Torah. And I tell them, in a word, you'll forgive me, baloney. Baloney, baloney. First of all, by the way, Rashi on Nach is humming a different tune a little bit. Now, there's a little bit more, restrained, but there's a reason for that. What was the age of the student for whom Rashi was writing? Who did Rashi think his audience was? How old was the student for whom Rashi was writing? 5 years old?
Well, that's what the Gemara said, right?
Well, no, let me finish. 5 years old, 15 years old, 25, 45, 65, 75. And there was once a person was a very interesting guy. He lived to a very, very ripe age, and he knew Rashi's on Torah by heart backwards. He was a doctor. And they used to ask him, he says, if you learn Rashi for as many years as I did, you know it too. But he could tell you every nuance of Rashi, not just the words, he could tell you every nuance. And so what's the answer to my question? For which age did Rashi write? The answer is yes. Did he write? Yes. He wrote for every age. Rashi was trying to write a perush that would allow everyone to learn Chumash every week, He
wanted to be accessible.
Accessible, and I think you had telegraphed that one of the issues was the canonization of Rashi. So that, by the way, it's Rav Moshe Mikutsi in the Smag who asked his Rebbeim, we don't know Aramaic so well anymore, let's make Rashi Shnayim Mikra V'Echad Rashi. And even though there were Balei Atosis who didn't want to agree, because Aramaic is a Rabbi Yehuda Levi says Aramaic was the tongue of Avram Avinu. Aramaic has kedusha of a sort. There are words Garas Ladus in the Torah Aramaic, right? Ramosha Mikutsi won the day. There's, by the way, a wonderful article I wanted to mention by that same Penkower in a volume called, I pulled it out because I have an article there too, Limud V'dat Machshava Yehudit, Learning and Thinking in Jewish Philosophy that Ben Gurion University put out. The title of the article in English is The Canonization of Rashi's Commentary on the Pentateuch. It's in Hebrew. It's fantastic. It'll tell you the whole story, tell you the whole how to. So Rashi, he dies in 1105. By 200 years later, he's already in like Flynn. But that was his purpose. In other words, you'll say, but Rashi, why didn't you give me something a little more pizzazz? Pizzazz hin, pizzazz here. Again, that's his modesty. I want you to be able to know what's in the Torah backwards, forwards, on many levels. You'll find new mahalchim every year. You'll find new things in what I did. You'll find new insights. If you want to then stress, I'm sure, like he told Rashbam, you're doing a good job, right? All Gedolim will say that. Rebbe, we specialized in your area. Good. No, you didn't have to do like him. You wanted to take a field and expand it. Or should be.
He wasn't dogmatic. He wasn't dogmatic about his own parish. That's what you're saying.
That's what I call the intellectual modesty.
Right.
Right.
He wanted more to come out from different streamlines to come out of it. He was a beginning, not a.
And by the way, how many versions of Rashi in English do we have? You know, the old one, the new one, right? Yeah. How many versions of Rashbam in English do we have? One very nice one from my good friend Marty Lakshin, who did Rashbam. That was his dissertation he did on Rashbam. And then he went through the whole Torah in English. They translated it to Hebrew, right? One, very good, with nice footnotes, excellent, very illuminating. That's all you need. And most people don't have a copy. First of all, it's very expensive. But, Rashi in English, well, everybody has Rashi in English. Again, they should learn it in Hebrew. It's even better. But if they can. But that's Rashi.
So you say he reached the canonization status mainly because of the accessibility. And Onkelos, for example, it's much harder for people to learn. That's essentially what...
That's what the Smog said. Look, they used to do Aramaic Targum in Ashkenaz. They did it. They kept it on Shavuos and on Seventh Day Pesach because those are the two biggest nisim of the Torah, and you have all kinds of wonderful piyutim to those akdomis. That's for Shavuos because they used to translate. Meir Schatz was a little bit older than Rashi, died in the late 11th century. Anyway, the Smog says people don't speak Aramaic. By the way, there were people in northern France, Chachamim, who said, let's put in laws, let's put in a French translation. Let's give people Mamalosh. Like Yiddish. That didn't pass either. The Smog said Aramaic is not as accessible as it was. Never mind that Onkelos is also Eretz Yisrael Aramaic, which is not even the Aramaic of the Gemara. It's a little harder unless you're used to it. I mean, you can get used to it. Listen, Onkelos is greater than great. It's terrific. But you learn a lot of things there. And Rashi quotes Onkelos all the time, right? That's is Onkelos Peshat or whatever. The answer is yes. But anyway, but Rashi can use him too. But again, but Onkelos is on the pasuk, so Rashi can use him because he's not coming from some left field. He's coming from right on the pasuk, right? So you're exactly right. The canonization happened so quickly because Rashi was a hit with everyone. And don't you think that the Bali HaTosfos, but Rashi over here said this, it's a steer to over there.
So
right? They ask all the time kashas on Rashi. Not quite as extensively as in Tosfos, but not so little. So there's something they were busy playing with Rashi. They weren't saying, we know that already. So anyway, I think you're absolutely right about the accessibility. That's Rabban Shel Yisrael, right? Rashi, you can't move in Chumash without him, and you can't move in Gemara without him. That's a pretty good
there's kind of like an unintended outcome of Rashi in terms of, obviously he was very accessible, but the unintended outcome meaning that Rashi kind of selected these midrashim carefully, right, from Chazal. Right. And now due to that process, we kind of stopped learning Midrash as its own field of inquiry, and we kind of lost that accessibility to Midrash
It's a tough choice. Look, the same kind of thing happened when the Rif wrote his Chidusha Halachas. There were people who stopped learning all the Gemara and learned mainly the Rif. People even did that a little bit with Rama's Mishnah Torah. It's got everything in there. Why do I have to knock myself out? Not just because of laziness or inability. Those choices are always an issue. Look, that's why all these successes of Rashi didn't have as much success as he did. Because if you have him, what do you need them? In other words, we'll live without them. So that is, and again, it's and on the other hand, because Rashi is midrash heavy for all the careful reasons that we talked about. In today's westernized society, the Rambam doesn't do midrashim. We got boop boop boop. Well, maybe Rashi knew something. In other words, I don't mean just knew the material, right? There's plenty in there that can be learned, and so that's part of also the problem that we have. Listen, we're also used to modern day writing. Rashi wrote both on Shas and on Mikra very briefly, right? He doesn't go into any. Like I say, if you saw that Rashi in Chulin that was 3/4 of a page long, you go, that can't be Rashi. He never wrote that long. Today, the bigger the book, a bigger book, more credit. It has to, right? You gotta give me a whole volume. This is very bright. I had a Rebbe in 11th grade. He was a brilliant Rebbe. It's a famous Rebbe. If I say much more, I'll know who it is. There's nothing wrong with that. He announced the first day of 11th grade in MTA, where I never left the whole place. I graduated MTA, but I never graduated yeshiva. I'm still there. He came in the first day and he said, "Gentlemen, Rashi is the great apocapator." And we looked at him. We said, "We didn't even know he was ill." Meaning Rashi shortens, and he showed us right away, right? Rashi put himself into the Gemara. He wasn't trying to show you how clever he could be. He was being. I'm a servant of the Gemara and the reader, and that's really the way it goes. Who writes a book like that today? It's like we had a Rebbe in MT at that time, Rabbi Frank, who wrote like a Jastro, a modernized, a different version of Jastro. Who writes it? It's great. Who writes a book like that? You write it like I write a book, a big book. My mother used to be my best reader. She's not alive anymore, but she bought all the books. People, right? Oh, they bought the book. We reviewed the book. Got a lot of footnotes. Rashi didn't worry about any of that stuff. So the Rambam used to ask in his chuvas how the Mishnah Torah was selling, but that's because he held that was the summation of halacha in his day. It wasn't for his gaiva. It was how we doing in halacha. Right, but modern authors, it's a bestseller. It's I got to look on Amazon where my book holding. I've done all that stuff. What number is it? Number 4 million, number 2 million. Oh, I went down a million. It's So this is Rashi is not like that.
Before I say what I want to say, first of all, I just want to say your natural joy is something very infectious. You are just your inner joy jumps off the screen. But I want
to. They've accused me of that on other podcasts. So I'm getting used. The answer
it's infectious. It's a big compliment.
This is what I learned since I'm a little boy. I learned with very happy people. I learned
we should always be happy.
Some of them were not so happy, but they let me be happy. They were very good.
but I want to go back to what Benji, because I think what Benji was trying to say.
No.
I'm going to try to rephrase it. Benji, if I get it wrong, let me know. Yeah. I think what he's trying to say is, I don't think he was trying to get at we don't learn other midrashim, we learn these midrashim. I think what Benji was trying to say was midrash as its own field, analyzing what is midrash.
Yep,
has taken a back seat.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely
so
right.
because now that because Rashi today, in my mind, unfortunately, has become pure pshat. So he brings the midrash. This is what happened, and we move on. And there's no, almost like what. And this was my last question when I sent it to you before the podcast.
Right.
Do you think we're learning Rashi today the way Rashi wanted us to learn it? And I think that's sort of what Benji was trying to get into.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get into.
Yeah. So I'll turn the question around. We figured out that there were many that there are probably more, right? There are more curves to Rashi al HaTorah than we realize. There are more maslulim, there are more pitch speeds. One of them was Midrashic literature. And that may be the one that got the short straw,
Yeah.
right? In other words, that's what you're saying. And you know what? You're probably right. I'm thinking in my mind, I was just starting to think of experts, several of whom are still alive, but they're mainly retired in Midrashic literature. There were people in Hebrew University, people in New York, people, and they have some students. They have some students. But so again, I'll say it this way. We're talking a lot about the theory of literature, not literary theory, but the theory of literature, which is relevant. And, it's a miktsah in general study, the theory of, if you deal with literature of the Rishonim as I do, you have to know about theories of literature. You can't be an amoritz in these things because you can get some good organizing principles. This, by the way, is not dissimilar to what the Rambam did. Take any great canonized work. Right? Take any great canonized work. Take the Rashi, take the Rambam, take the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is a great example, by the way. There was an Ashkenaz. There are actually two competitors to the Shulchan Aruch. Well, one to the Beis Yosef and one to the Shulchan Aruch, Ashkenazic, that we don't learn so much today. I mean, I like to because it's fun, but we don't do it so much today. I got time to do it. That Baruch Hashem, Yeshiv's good to me. And what I mean is as follows. And what happens to the work becomes canonized. And again, either you can't do everything the work does, or you have to, right? What am I talking about? Right when the Beis Yosef was writing his encyclopedic summary of halacha as a parish to the Torah, the Marshal, Mamish, they died within years of each other, Mamish contemporaries. Reb Shlomo Luria was writing Yam Shel Shlomo, which was meant to be all the halachos that come out of Shas. But as opposed to the Beis Yosef, who then translated his discursive, his encyclopedic material into the very apodaic Shulchan Aruch, 2 words, the Yam Shel Shlomo kept it that way. In fact, we don't have all of it. It's a whole problem. Yam Shel Shlomo is a great posek. The post can quote him all the time. Nobody can compare the impact of the Yam Shel Shlomo to the Beis Yosef. You can't.
Yeah.
And if somebody has a choice, everybody will tell them, not badly, but learn the Beis Yosef. That was that competitor. The Ashkenazi competitor to the Shulchan Aruch was the Lavush, who did exactly what Rabbi Yosef Kara did, a little more thought, a little more philosophy, a little more Kabbalah. Yosef Kara is a big Makobah, which almost can't tell.
You're referring to the Lavush Ora?
The Lavush, right?
Yeah.
Mordechai Yafa, Reb Mordechai
Yeah.
Yafa. Not so many years after the Shulchan Aruch, next generation. And these works are quoted, they're quoted by poskim, right? But again, once the Shulchan Aruch kavashet hashetach, and by the way, we'd have to sit together for another session and quantify what the Shulchan Aruch has that they're, like with Rashi, what did Rashi do that didn't get picked up? So I think you're onto something. Midrash is one of the things that he did very well, that he knew backwards, forwards, and up and down, right? By the way, who else knows Midrash backwards, forwards, up and down in this period? Paitanim, Piyut. That's also a lost art. I have a chapter in that same book where I talk about the Balei Atos al Torah. I talk about Balei Atos and Piyut.
I saw that.
They wrote much more than we know. Believe me. I had to work for years to figure that out. Woo. All of a manuscript almost. Whatever. So again, things we say the Piyutim, we say, what do you mean there are other Piyutim? Billions, not billions, but tens, thousands, many. So, right, there was a competitor to the tour who lost out to the tour. Mamish, a contemporary of Rabbi Yaakov Balaturim, a student of the tour's father, the Rosh, a direct student of the Rosh. Rabbi Yerucham ben Meshulam, he wrote a 3-part work. The first part is called Adam v'Chava. That's Orachayim, Yoredeya, Evan HaEzer. And the other part was called Mei Sharim, Yashrus, Choshen Mishpat. He's got things in there we don't know from anywhere else. It wasn't as organized as well as the tour. It wasn't, whatever it is. People, so my students know these things, but people go, what are you talking about? They think it was a Karaite named Yerucham ben Mishal. No, he was a Talmud of the Rosh. So the same way that whole works can get completely taken off the shelf almost.
Yeah.
So not that I'm saying we should have anticipated that something of Rashi didn't get picked up, but you put something on it. But you put your finger on it. You put your finger on something very important. I have to tell you, by the way, I want to end with this, but I'll tell you, by the way, even Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, who's German through and through, not French, or Poznansky says, there's no pshat in Germany. It's only in France, which could be, because there are things that the Balatos in France did that the German Balatos didn't do. Gaps, things. Okay. We have a parish from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid al Torah that he dictated to his son, Reb Zalman, in the last year of his life. And there are gematrias and there are things, but he uses the word pshat a number of times. What do you think of this one, folks? Right? Not so long ago. Bas Paro opens up the basket and she sees the yeled, right? V'inei hanar boche. Right? Again, in English, don't get excited. Baby Moshe. She sees baby Moshe crying, right? She opens up the basket and she sees the baby and the yingle is crying. So you'll say, he looked like a yeled, he's a male, right? And he's crying, it's like, okay. What does Rashi do? Oh, and most importantly, based on that look, that cook, whichever part of Europe you're from, right? Your parents are from, your grandparents are from, right? She says, "Ooh, mialdei ha'ivrimzeh." It's a Yiddish kind, a Jewish child. What, he cried in Hebrew? He cried in Yiddish? What did he do here? So what does Rashi say there? No lad mohul. She checked his mila. She saw he had no mila, and he doesn't really, So that she knew he was Jewish. Rashi doesn't get involved, which again is a chazal. I got it right. Makes sense. Good. Doesn't get too involved with anything else here. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid gives the following perush, which is actually from a Midrash. I'll tell you where it's from in a second, but I shouldn't give that away because it's fascinating. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says she saw the yeled. That was Moshe. V'hinei hanar bocheh. That's a different person, right? Even in Chazal, yeled signifies one age, nar, in Rishonim, right? Little kids, big kids. So who's the other boy? Who's the other boy person here? Miriam, we know, is in the bushes waiting to see what comes out. She's a snooer. She's right 6 years old. She got to have sneers, right? She's in the bush. Who's the yeled? Says it's right in Rabbi Yehuda Chassid Torah, which has been published, right? The controversy has been published. The Na'ar is, and Na'ar is bigger than a Yeled. Yeled is a little baby. Na'ar is a little older. Younger, older. The Na'ar is Aaron.
Oh, wow.
And here's how he puts it together. First of all, listen, Aaron's not chopped liver either. Miriam is behind the bushes watching, sittering. Aaron is sitting on the dock of the shoreline. I'll say he's sucking his lollipop there, whatever. It's his brother. He's also watching. He's 3 years old. He's a big boy. When Bas Paro, this is what Rabbi Chassid says, and I'll tell you where he's getting from. When Bas Paro opens the thing, if it was a movie, they go, little Aaron can't hold it in anymore. That's my baby brother. He starts screaming, give out. Not Miriam. She's a cool customer. She's 6. He's screaming bloody murder. She says, mialdei ha'ivrimzeh. These are Jewish people. The 3-year-old brother is crying because the 6-year-old brother is crying because I may be doing something to the 3-year-old brother. What a parish. Now, is that
wild?
What?
It's wild.
Wild. You could look it up. Casey Stengel, Hovland, you could look it up. Is it, because he was a Yankee manager too. I'm a Yankee fan. The Mets, but he's a Yankee fan. By me, he's a Yankee. Anyway, is it pshat or is it drash?
Drash.
I think you can see some shot in it though, because
Why?
after the Shirat Hayam, when Miriam sings her own song, it says the prophetess Miriam, sister of Aaron, doesn't bring up Moshe, right? It's calling us back.
In other words, that's very good. I have no problem because Aaron, Moshe, and Miriam are a box set their entire lives. They're a box set. They come together, right? They come to talk to him. They come here. They die in the same. They're a box set. You'll say it's Drash, so I like that. You'll say it's Drash because it doesn't say that in a pasuk.
No, I was referring more to the point where not the nar and the yeled aspect. That I would say you could read it as a pshat because it is there.
Yeah, because a yeled isn't a nar and a nar isn't a yeled.
Yeah, the fact that the text switches from yeled to nar is you could explain it away that way. That could make sense.
So you're right. There is.
I was saying Drash to the part where he's crying for the brother. That's a Jew.
Oh yeah.
That's what I meant. Okay.
But what is Yudah Chassid reading in? That Aaron is there. Again, it's setting that background scene. That's not so wacky, right? In other words, Miriam's in the foreground. Why didn't the Torah tell you Aaron's in the background? He's in the front. Why didn't the Torah tell you that? Doesn't need to. She's going to be the speaker. Aaron has no other part in the story. You know, it's like the question that's asked: what happened to Yitzchak after the Aggadah? He disappears. He doesn't show up till after he missed his mother's levaya. He shows up to marry Rivka. So Rashi get Chazal. He went to Yeshiva Shem Be'ever. There are Ashkenazic midrashim that he was geschachten. He went for 3 years R&R in Gan Eden, all kinds of fabulous midrashim. Ibn Ezra says it's a rule in Chumash. If you're not on, it's like a stage rule, lahavdil. If you're not on the stage, they don't talk about you. It's not a recorder. The Levaya of Sarah was run by Avraham. They didn't need Yitzchak. He paid the money. He did the negotiations. We don't need to hear from him till he gets married. Simple. That's pshat, fragment. That's pshat. Okay. So it's true that Aaron is being read in, but the reading is not bad. And again, again, it's all a matter of taste. Could she have, in fact, thought he was Jewish because he's Nolad Mohul? She sees a Mila? Maybe. Okay. She's a smart lady. She knows things. She's an international person. I like that to explain why she knew it was a Yiddish kid. And you gotta get some hesmer into that. Now, by the way, it is a Midrash. It's from something called Midrash Avkir. Avkir is an acronym. Amen. Bimheira Ken Yehi Ratzon. Avkir. It's right. Amen. Aleph. Beis. Bimheira Ken Yehi Ratzon. It's a Jewish Midrash.
To play a little bit Rashbam here, I'm not saying I don't know what he says here, but I'm just playing devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the situation and context kind of be obvious that it's a Jewish child, being that you're
You might not have to 100%. By the way, Rashi also says, he does say something about the nar. I take it back, right? Moshe had a shtimmer via nar. He didn't sound like a little baby. He sounded like he was 6. He had a good shtimmer, right? Nar, hine nar bocher, right? Okay, but again, cute. Anyway, it's from a midrash that we don't have. The fellow who studied with one of these midrash people at Hebrew U, his name of the fellow is Amos Geula. He's translating one of my books now. His outfit. Whatever, the big book with all this stuff in it, they drive them crazy. But anyway, so he published all the examples that we have of a few missing midrashim that we only know because of the Rishonim. So you're thinking we don't learn midrash, we don't even know all the midrashim, right? Rashi and Tosfos had versions of Midrash Tanchuma that we don't have. You see it all the time. They had things that they call from Midrash Tanchuma,
fascinating,
not ours. So it may have been in that day, right? They weren't so Rambamized. They weren't worried about, Halacha Aleph Perek Beis. They were doing Midrashim, and we are not such beneficiaries. So whether it's intellectual, societal, brain only has so many portholes in it, although I believe the brain has infinite. That's why I do a lot of Narishkeit too, because anything you remember is good. Machloket ha psychologists, do you have infinite ta'im in the brain or finite? I think infinite. So you can take in everything. Take in, not bad things, but take in anything good. Take it in. You'll need it somewhere, and the brain will hold it. But there is a problem. There is overload. People, I can't have 4,000 books, on everything.
Rabbi
Absolute
Kanarfogel,
pleasure to have you.
this was
All right,
amazing.
I went a long time. I'm sorry.
Not at all.
Please, none of this. Don't even
Not a
apologize.
brief. My students will tell
First of
you.
all, to find that you're, a fellow MTA alum and a Yankee fan, so that was great. That was a great thing to find out. But what we really want to that we really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun and so informative, and I'm so happy that we finally got to do Rashi justice on our podcast. So,
Oh, listen, this is Rashi justice. This is, not that you need to do more on the podcast, but this is, as with all Rishonim, where we scratched the surface nicely. We even dug down a little bit. Could talk about Rashi for years. By the way,
the matter remains open. The matter remains open.
by the way, right. Many of these issues remain absolutely open, even whether it's formal machkar or for individuals. Maybe we'll get smarter as the years go by. We'll find more material, but we'll try.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Rabosai. Really appreciate it.
Much hatzlacha, Freils and Purim. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.